Thanks, Alexis. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this morning. Peggy Olwell is the Plant Conservation and Restoration Program Lead for the Bureau of Land Management. And she was scheduled to give this presentation on the National Seed Strategy. However, Peggy's got some health problems that are keeping her from having the lung capacity for giving a talk today. And so Patricia Angelis from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has very graciously stepped in to fill those big shoes of Peggy's. Patricia has a lot of experience with the National Seed Strategy from its inception. And so I'll give you a quick bio of her and turn this over to you, Patricia. Patricia is a botanist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She has served for 20 years as the Fish and Wildlife Service's liaison to the Plant Conservation Alliance Federal Committee and as chair of the PCA Medicinal Plant Working Group. She became chair of the Plant Conservation Alliance Federal Committee in January 2020. As a contributing author of the 2015 National Seed Strategy for Rehabilitation and Restoration, Patricia now facilitates its implementation within U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and across federal agencies, and partners to increase the availability of locally adapted plants and accelerate the pace, scale, and quality of restoration across the country. Patricia's background is in ethnobotany with a doctorate from the University of Maryland for her collaboration with Mosquito Indians of Nicaragua, documenting everyday plant usage in Mosquito society. She obtained an undergraduate degree in botany from the George Washington University, and she has lived in Germany, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, and El Salvador, and currently lives in Annandale, Virginia, with her two now grown children and the family cats, Luna and Bigfoot. Patricia, it's my great pleasure to welcome you this morning, and thank you very much for stepping in to give this presentation. Over to you.
Sorry, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I hooked up my headphone at the last minute and I hadn't tested it yet. So first of all, I'd like to just say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody at today's meeting conference. And thank you, Tom, for that great introduction. Appreciated your discussions already this morning, and Alexis, the orientation and that photo contest looked really fabulous. So I think it's going to be a really fun conference. So as Tom mentioned, yes, I am talking today in place of Peggy Olwell, and she did want me to express her regrets for not being able to give this presentation today. I am located on the East Coast at headquarters, which technically for Fish and Wildlife Service is actually in Falls Church, Virginia, but so we're like the satellite headquarters. So today I'm happy to talk to you about the National Seed Strategy and the progress that we've been making since it was released in 2015. Let's see. So as many of you are aware, climate-induced disasters are impacting everyone. And this map of the United States shows that extreme weather events that have been recorded between 2015 and 2020 are impacting every state in the across the US. And in some cases, multiple disasters in each state. You can see the little legend, I'm hoping, for floods, tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, and droughts. And you see that a lot of those colors are actually overlaid with each other. So since 1980, in the United States, there have been nearly 300 weather and climate disasters that cost at least $1 billion US, totaling more than $1.9 trillion in damages. Out west, we're squarely in a period of mega drought and mega fires. Over the past 20 years, 6 million hectares or 150 million acres have burned across the United States. So to restore these damaged ecosystems to resiliency, we need a significantly greater quantity of locally adapted native seeds than is currently available. So the U.S. National Seed Strategy was developed in 2015 to try to address our need to ensure the availability of genetically appropriate seeds to be available when and where we need them to restore healthy, resilient, and biodiverse plant communities and sustainable ecosystems. Organizations and individuals at the national, state, and local level all contribute to common goals, pooling resources, and sharing information to achieve results for advancing plant conservation on a broad scale. So success under the National Seed Strategy is envisioned and achieved through the establishment of nationwide networks of collectors to collect the seed, researchers to develop the seed, farmers to grow them, nurseries and seed storage facilities to house adequate quantities of appropriate seed, and of course, restoration ecologies who know how to put the right seed in the right place at the right time. I guess the last comment I'll make is that this is the first national seed strategy of its kind. And we are in the process of actually updating the strategy as part of a regular 5-year review that was built into the strategy. So this next slide is really dense and jam-packed, and I'll talk a little bit slowly in case it gives you time to sort of read some of the nuggets here. I'm not really going to go over each one, but what this slide is trying to illustrate is how the National Seed Strategy is meeting our national priorities. In January 2020, President Biden issued the Executive Order 14008 on tackling climate change. And many aspects were illustrated in that executive order as needing to have work done to address the issues of climate change in the United States. And as you can see, we see a close connection with the work under the National Seed Strategy to actually address many of those priorities that have been established. So now let's turn to progress we've made so far since the seed strategy was released in 2015. In 2021, we released a progress report, a 5-year report, into which nearly 500 projects were submitted by federal agencies representing projects undertaken from across 17 federal agencies, more than 20 tribal nations, and 52 states and territories, with over 380 total partners. There you can see in the middle, who invested $167 million in projects to support the development of native seed materials for restoration. So allow me to just pause for a moment to explain a little bit about the native plant materials development process, some of which has already been discussed here today. But these are sort of the 7 steps that we usually focus on. So the first step, I think everyone should be able to, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the upper left corner is collection. That's the first step toward bringing native plants into production. You can see that in the past 5 years, more than almost 9,000 native seed collections were made. The next step is evaluation and development. And I'll be talking a little bit about the National Academies study. So I'll just mention that in the 5 years that were reported on, we had more than 170 scientific reports and articles on native seed research and development that were published, which is really phenomenal. The next phase is field establishment. And in that 5-year period, thousands of native seed crops were developed by local and regional efforts, such as some of the seed collaborations that were mentioned here already today, across the United States in 32 ecoregions. The next step is production in your lower right corner. And I guess the nugget I'll talk about there is the fact that we've engaged with more than 65 local nurseries, farmers, and growers of botanic gardens to produce these seeds. So the National Seed Strategy is important for local rural economies and jobs. The next step is procurement. And this is the really important part where people are guaranteed that, they're going to get paid for their crops, and we're asking them to develop new crops. And so being able to sell them to the public, to the land managing agencies, or to the other organizations that need them is really important. And so in that 5-year period, we procured, paid $20 million annually to get more than 2,000 million pounds of seeds under production, or that were produced. Next, for storage, obviously storage facilities are really important to maintain both the conservation collection of these seeds as well as the working collections. And you can see that we've been increasing our facilities capacities and the types of seeds that are available and being conserved in long-term storage. The last and ultimate step for this whole process is restoration. And in that 5-year period, it was reported that more than 10 million acres were impacted by these activities, with including more than 17 million sagebrush seedlings being grown out to reduce restore the sagebrush steppe. Okay, so looking at our progress under the National Seed Strategy and from a different perspective, this shows the types of projects that native plant materials are used for. And it's really just a handful of the ways that native plants are used, but they're pretty significant. As you can see, most of those uses were reported in every single state. So the priorities, you can read for yourself the legend there, but I'll just mention that as you can see, once again, almost every state in this, and I'm just looking a little more closely at my slide, so apologize. Almost every state reported progress or needs under each one of these categories. So it's really amazing to see how important native plant materials are across our country. Now this map is fun, so we're going to watch it go through a few times while I'm trying to explain this. This is the Bureau of Land Management's Seeds of Success collections over 20 years. And you'll see it as the screen populates, you'll see that the collections grow and grow over time. So the BLM started the Seeds of Success Wildland Seed Collection Program about 20 years ago to bring into production the seeds for plants that were not currently available. And it is a team effort. Now, after 20 years, more than 26,000 native seed collections have been accessioned into the national collection. And these are collections across 43 states and 93 ecoregions. 6 states have yet to have any accessions, any collections made, and we're going to be working on that. Those are Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina. And there's a new undertaking in the Southeast that we're really excited about called Seeds of Success Southeast, which we hope will not only begin to tackle making some of those collections in those states, but then we'll actually be able to prioritize additional plant species that we need to focus on. So I want to give you some statistics that Peggy provided, and Peggy and her team provided about the collections that have been made over these 20 years, because it's really a phenomenal effort. So Bureau of Land Management has collected more than 9,000 accessions. The U.S. Forest Service has collected more than 2,000, and this just exemplifies that it's not just the one agency doing it, and everybody needs these materials. Department of Defense has become involved and has made 65 collections so far. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has now made just over 400 collections. The Bureau of Reclamation has registered 20 collections. State and private entities have collected more than 3,000 accessions. The Nature Conservancy has made 200 collections, and we have 16 collections from tribal lands. So it's a work in progress. It's a team effort, and it really benefits, everybody across the United States, all land managers. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about really a novel procurement tool that the Bureau of Land Management was able to develop in 2018. This is a native seed production contract that's called an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or IDIQ contract. And the goal is to increase the availability and procurement of source identified native seed while minimizing the financial risk to growers. So it's a larger contract that allows BLM to draw from a larger area of growers to obtain more source identified seed along different seed transfer zones within the ecoregions. So the original contract identified 70 forbs and 41 grasses that BLM staff would wish to order from the vendors, and the vendors could bid on that contract. And the way this contract works is it began with a capital working fund where the Bureau of Land Management put initial funds into the contract that would pay for the vendors to produce the seed. The seed coming out of the program then goes back into the Bureau of Land Management seed warehouse system and is available for projects and not just on BLM lands, but to tribes, states, and other agencies that are looking for these materials. The proceeds from the sale of those seed purchases go back into the working capital fund, so it continues to reseed itself so that new contracts can be let out for additional plant species and other seed zones. Oh, and any seed produced beyond the contracted amount is available for that grower to sell on the commercial market, on the private market. So this slide really just gives a quick overview of how that contract has been working over these last few years since it was started in 2018. And you can see that since its inception, the contract has produced more than 55 species, the BLM has paid more than $6 million for more than 100,000 pounds of seed from 55 species in 62 seed transfer zones. So it's a really phenomenal impact. Now I'll shift gears, and I will admit that I'm hoping I will see when I get a 5-minute warning because that's on a different screen. So I mentioned that I was going to talk about this study that the National Academies, time's up, that the National Academies is working on. Thank you. They are conducting I'll just wrap it up really quickly. They're conducting an assessment of federal, state, tribal, and private sector native seed needs and capacities, and our capacities to meet those needs. And this information is really going to help the Plant Conservation Alliance agencies and partners really understand how to improve deficiencies in our native seed supply and to take steps to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of our using native plants on public lands for restoration. I'm going to zoom through here really quickly just to let you know that Congress first asked the Bureau, the Departments of Interior and USDA to undertake a native plant development program, which was led by the Bureau of Land Management in Interior and Forest Service at USDA. Actual language in appropriations bills has mentioned the National Seed Strategy. Over time, funding for the seed strategy has increased. This is just Bureau of Land Management funding that has been dedicated to the seed strategy. BLM is one of the only agencies that's gotten dedicated funding until the 2022 bipartisan infrastructure law, which is actually providing dedicated funding to both Interior and USDA to implement the seed strategy. Okay, sorry for going over. If we have time for questions, I'm happy to entertain them, or I can follow up later.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for that really informative talk. We super appreciate it. We are now going to have a few minutes for questions, and I will be pulling them, just a reminder, from the Q&A box icon that you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you see a question you would like answered, please like it, and those questions with the most likes will be moved to the top. So that way we can make sure we get those answered during our allotted time. So it looks like one of our more popular questions right now is, how is the national strategy addressing seed that cannot be stored long-term, i.e. acorns or plants that are best propagated vegetatively?
Okay, well, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I started to sound like I was echoing in my own ears. Yes, so the way the seed strategy is trying to address recalcitrant species or species that don't store well, or long-lived species that the seed isn't the starting point you need, is that we do have actions to address and work with the folks who are doing cryopreservation and different biotechnology to deal with those tissue culture of species that really you can't put their seeds in long-term storage. And we also have actions under the seed strategy, which are being worked on now, to find alternative mechanisms for seedling increase for things like shrubs and trees that are longer lived and don't really, they're better off as it's better to put seedlings on the ground for those rather than seed. And so the seed strategy does try to address all those issues.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then our next question is it possible to use the IDIQ contract as a template for seed networks or agencies to use as we are building relationships with growers?
So I'm not sure who asked that question, and I don't know if I can speak for Peggy. I would say probably. I think it's a public document. To be honest, if it's a federal agency, those usually are. And she's usually more than happy to share that information to anybody who is interested. I don't know if, I know some of her people are on the line today, and I really don't know if one of them might have, I guess she'd have to answer in the chat. And I can't tell if she would be able to answer. So I guess my answer right now would be yes, I think so. Get in touch with us. You can see the email addresses right there, please, and we'll follow up.
Thank you. Okay, and then another question, where will extra seeds be available for purchase? Is that a possibility? When is that a possibility?
So the way that works is when the growers have fulfilled the contracts under the IDIQ, any additional seed that was produced beyond what was requested in the contract, they can sell to the private sector. And where we've seen this work in the past, different parts of the US are differently positioned on that native plant materials development cycle. And one of the places where I think it's been going on the longest, I guess, after the West Coast would be sort of the tall grass prairie region. And I remember seeing a presentation in 2005 where they didn't have enough seed to restore their prairies. And so initially, the federal land management agencies were the ones who pushed to get the native seed materials produced. But now they're the smallest customer of the bunch. There's so much interest in native plants there. It's demanded, by the public. And so I think it's sort of a wave of demand, and then that pulls that supply forward.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think we have time for about one more kind of quick question. And so we have one that's risen to the top saying, could you comment on the relative importance of growing seeds for endangered species versus wild area restoration? I noticed only one state, Alabama, ranked endangered species as the highest demand for seeds.
So I guess, yes, that's a good question. And let me first say that the National Seed Strategy, as much as I hate to say it because I work in an agency that defines wildlife as animals, the National Seed Strategy is really looking at the habitat species. And so it's not focused on those T and E species to the extent that we're not trying to work on that species itself, but we're trying to create the habitat that those species need, because in large measure, a lot of the T&E species, both plant and animal, need habitat. The need for captive production or artificial propagation of T&E species is actually addressed under a similar model, but through the Centers for Plant Conservation. They have a national collection and they focus on that particular imperiled species itself, and the work that's done there. But certainly where you saw one state mentioned the need to work on T&E species, it's about the habitat. So where states have identified a species of need, if they need habitat, that's where the seed strategy comes in. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And then actually, we have time for one more. I was a little bit off on my timing. So
Okay.
we're going to do one more, I think. And then this is a good question. Are the seeds produced only for national agencies?
So no. And this is where I might have to stutter a little bit, because I do know that the Seeds of Success national curator or national coordinator is at this meeting, but I'm not sure she and I can speak to each other. Materials are available from Seeds of Success collections for research by qualified entities. They can contact it's Fort Collins, where the materials are stored in long-term storage. And I don't know, working collections may also be stored in other places around the US, but I know for sure the long-term storage collection is there, as well as material for research. The seeds that are produced, for instance, through the IDIQ, that's another story. Those are available beyond the Bureau of Land Management for agencies but agencies need to work, with the BLM seed warehouse, or organizations need to work with the warehouse in order to procure those materials. I'm hoping. Oh, and Anna, who did say the SOS seed collections are stored at Bend Seed Extractory and the National Lab for Genetic Resource Preservation at Fort Collins. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patricia. We really appreciate you taking the time and giving this talk. And with that, I think we will transition to our next speaker. And so I will give it over to Alexis. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. I see we still have a few lingering open questions. Patricia, if you have a little bit of time and availability right now, you could type some answers to those questions. Otherwise, we might have a place to open them up in Whova, but we will be looking into that, and we'll have to make sure the speakers all have access in Whova as well in order to do that. But thank you so much for that update on the native seed strategy, for speaking in Peggy's place at the last minute. That was really great and really informative. So I think we are getting ready to transition to our next speaker. Kavoka, if you'd like to turn on your video and share your screen, we will get started. Welcome. Thanks for being here. And just a quick reminder that we are requesting that you ask questions of the speakers in the question and answer function in that box, as opposed to the chat. We do have people monitoring both, but the question and answer moderator will be just asking questions from that Q&A box as opposed to in the chat.